Welcome to video number 7. In this video, we're going to take a look at how we can animate views in our application. So any Uiview object has some properties that describe the way it looks. Its frame, which describes its origin and its superview and its width and height, a background color, and even a property called alpha, which gives a view its opacity. Here, we're going to make an application that launches with a black square at the center of our view controller's view, horizontally and vertically, and then we're going to place 3 buttons at the top of our view and program each one to animate a different property for our black square. So of course, let's begin by creating a new Xcode project. A single view application template still works, so we'll leave that selected. I'm going to name my project View Animations, and of course create it on the desktop. So this far, we've been using the Xcode built-in GUI for adding things, namely subviews, onto our view, whether it be a button, a label, another view, a table view. But in this video, we're going to programmatically display our black square in the center of the view. We'll use the GUI for the buttons, but it's important to see how you can programmatically create a view and how to place it and size it exactly where you want. So let's begin with that. Go to viewcontroller.h and add an instance variable of type Uiview, and we'll call it squareView. Now in viewcontroller.m, in the viewDidLoad method, let's create a Uiview object and store it in the squareView variable, and upon creating it, we're going to place it at the center of our view controller's view. We can create our square view like this. Square view equals Uiview alloc, and now we're going to call to the initWithFrame method, which takes a cgrect struct, and if you remember from the last video, a cgrect struct contains 2 other structs, a cgPoint struct and a cgSize struct, the first containing x and y coordinates for where this view will be placed in its superview, and a cgSize struct which contains its width and its height. So, to create a cgrect struct and pass it back to this method, we can use the cgrectMake function. With the first 2 parameters, we can give our new square view an origin or x and y coordinates, and with the second 2, we can give it a width and a height. So first, let's give it a width of 50 and a height of 50. And now we can use some very simple math to programmatically place this view in the center of our view controller's view. We can do that like this. Self.view, and remember, self.view is a reference to the view controller's view since we're in viewcontroller.m, which again is this view here. .frame.size .width divided by 2. So we're taking the full width of our view controller's view, which is 320, and halving it to place the square halfway across the screen on the x-plane. And now, to account for the fact that our square also has a width, we need to subtract half of our square view's width. So we can do that by appending -25. We can do exactly the same thing for our y-coordinate. Self.view.frame.size.height divided by 2 minus 25. Next, let's give our square view a background color so we can actually see it. We can do that like this. SquareView.backgroundColor equals, and now we're going to use the UIColor class, which is a great class that obviously comes with UIKit that allows us to pass around descriptions of colors that UIKit can use and accurately color things the way you want. So with the UIColor class, you can create a representation for any color you like using a method that allows you to pass in red, blue, and green values and an alpha, or you can use some of its predefined class methods for creating UIColor objects that describe certain common colors like blue or red or green or gray. Let's use the blue color method. So UIColor, again this is a class method, so we're calling to the UIColor class blue color. This will create a UIColor object that stores the color blue, and then we're going to pass that instance back to the square view's background color property, and then the square view will display its background as the color blue. Finally, we have to programmatically add our square view as a subview to our view controller's view. We can do that like this. Self.view add subview, and then we pass in our square view object. Let's run our application and see what we've got so far. Perfect. We have a 50 by 50 blue square placed exactly at the center of our view. Now let's get to the animating part. Quit the application, and let's start with an animation that changes the background color of our square view. For this, we're going to use some built-in Uiview class methods that Apple has provided for us with UIKit that essentially calculate and do the animating for you. So let's go to our main.storyboard file, and let's add a button. Let's title it Change BG for background. Now let's go to our viewController.h, create an IB action to connect that button to change background, save, go back to main.storyboard, and of course right click and drag from the button to the view controller and connect it to the change background sent events. Now let's implement that method. Before we start adding some code in the implementation of our change background method, let's open up our browser and take a look at Uiview. If we scroll down, you can see under animating views a substantial number of methods that allow us to open up a context wherein we'll change the properties that we want Uiview to animate, and then you can set some variables for how that animation will appear. So you can change the duration of the animation, you can give it a delay, you can change a curve, which means things like making the animation ease in or ease out, or ease in and ease out, and you can even tell it to repeat. To begin, we have to open with this method, begin animations context. Even though this method takes two parameters, we don't actually have to use those parameters to commit our animations, so we're going to pass in nil for both of those. So let's go back to Xcode and begin with Uiview. Again, this is a class method, so we send it to Uiview, not an instance of a Uiview object. Begin animations nil, context nil. Now let's set a duration for this animation. Uiview set animation duration, and you can pass in the number of seconds. Let's give it a duration of 1.5 seconds. Next, we make the changes to whatever property we want to animate. Now, not all properties can be animated automatically by these built-in Uiview methods. For example, changing the text on a label can't be animated. Even if you begin an animation context and then change the label's text, it won't be animated. But things like background color, alpha, and frame can be animated. You'll learn with time and practice which properties can be automatically animated and which can't. So let's change the background color. Square view background color equals, let's call it to the red color method. This will create a UI color instance which contains the color red. Finally, to actually go through with the animations, we call to the commit animations method. Now let's save and run our application. So if we click on the Change BG button, you can see over the course of 1.5 seconds, our square's background color is animated from blue to red. It's remarkable how easy this is to do using UIKit. When I was an amateur iOS developer, however many years ago, I was amazed at how easy it is to animate view transitions using UIKit. Okay, great. Now let's quit our application. Next, let's animate our view's alpha, which is a property that describes its opacity. It ranges from 0 to 1, and anything in between represents an opacity percentage. So, another button. We'll call it opacity. Let's create the IB action header. Change opacity. Now let's connect the button to this new method. Save, and now let's implement it. And since we're going to be using exactly the same format, as we did with our change background method. Let's just copy, paste, and then delete the line where we changed the background color and replace it with the line for changing the square view's alpha property. So square view.alpha, let's set it to 0.5, which is 50% opaque. Let's save and run the application again. Now, if we click on the opacity button, you can see over the course of 1.5 seconds, our square view goes from being fully opaque to semi-transparent. Let's do this one more time and change our view's frame. Let's add another button. We'll call it frame. Let's add the IB action header for it. Change frame. Now we can connect it. And let's implement this final method. And again, we can paste the code that we copied from the change background method. And here, we're going to begin by grabbing the square view's current frame. Now we're going to change some of the frame's values. So let's first change its x and y coordinates. So we can do that like this, frame.origin.x. Let's subtract 20 from where it currently is in the x-plane. Let's subtract 30 from where it currently is on the y-plane. And now let's change its width and height. Change the height and width to, how about 30? And finally, we give our square view this new frame. Let's run the application again. So if we click on frame, just like that, over the course of 1.5 seconds, our square view shrinks to 30 by 30 and shifts left 20 and up 30. Let's quit the application one more time and see what happens if we click all of our buttons at about the same time. You can see that, quite surprisingly, if you've never done this before, animations can stack on the same view. So again, now having seen how simple it is to animate things using the iOS SDK, you can start to mess around with any games that you have on your iPhone, and you can see that, for example, Angry Birds, animating one of those birds across the screen can be done relatively simply using the built-in Uiview animation methods. Now again, there's a lot more methods you can use to customize exactly how the animation is going to be calculated and appear to the user on the screen, but the idea here is that these built-in Uiview methods essentially calculate everything for you. All you have to do is give whatever property you're animating a starting value and a new value, and then commit the animation. With no more effort whatsoever, iOS calculates every frame for the animation and throws it up on the screen. Now again, since you can animate a UI view, you can also animate anything that is a subclass of a UI view. So you can change the frame of a button, a label, you can change a label's text color, its background color, its size, even something like a table view or a text field can be animated. Before we close this video up, I want to go back to Uiview's class reference and make a note that under animating views here it says use of the methods in this section is discouraged in iOS 4 and later. Use block-based animation methods instead. I'm not exactly certain why Apple discourages using these animation methods, but I do know that they recommend using these new methods instead. We're not going to change our app to use these block-based animating methods, but essentially probably the most important reason that I would guess that Apple wants you to use them is you can put any Uiview property changes you want inside of an animations block, and then you can put any code you want to be executed when that animation is complete inside the completion block. Here's an example of how that looks. This here denotes a block, as does this. So, for us, we put the property change between the begin animations context method and the commit animations method, whereas using the block method, you would put whatever property you want to change inside of a block. Well, that concludes this video. I highly encourage you to mess around with Uiview animations to any extent that you like and figure out just how far you can go with what Apple has built in UIKit for us for animating. At any rate, head over to video number 8 to learn how to archive and unarchive application data.